My goals are eternal goals. My God's eternal God.
There was not an option for us to do anything else.
There's not a doubt in my mind that this is the place God would have us to be.
It was just this confidence that I had that it's what God wanted us to do.
God can be trusted. He is trustworthy.
He's the one that provided the miracle and led us here very directly. If you don't have any faith, at least you can act like you've got faith, and that's what I started to do.
Every day a miracle.
But out of the physical desert blooms an oasis of spiritual refreshment. A Christian camp dedicated to bringing spiritual life to young people.
Intimidating. One of the things that was on my mind a lot and that I was trying to prepare for is, by the time we were moving to the desert, we had 3 children, a 4-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and no phone, no close hospital. Probably one of my biggest questions is, how am I going to handle an emergency, and especially with my children? That was intimidating.
Betty and I, even before we were married, we were both convinced that our futures lay in the realm of full-time service for the Lord. It was just a matter of deciding where that would be.
During the time when we were dating, we talked about boys' home. We talked about different ways to use what we were learning.
So we prepared for the Christian school environment and did that for a number of years. But whether or not it was going to be as a youth pastor or Christian school teaching or whatever, that idea of being in a full-time ministry for the Lord was a conviction for both of us. There was not an option for us to do anything else. It was in the summer of 71. Our church gave me the responsibility to take our young people to rental facilities and plan and get it all put together, and planning the schedule and planning the activities and bringing our own sports equipment and all that kind of stuff. And it just was so much work that, it occupied maybe 3 months of my life. I kept saying at the end of the summer that I'm never going to do that again. It was at that first summer of camp that I took young people as the leader to camp and then listened to their testimonies at the end of the week. I said, man, I worked for 3 years with young people trying to get them to make these kind of decisions, and here in 1 week we accomplished what I've been trying to do for 3 years.
We worked pretty close with some of those kids, and it was exciting to see them make decisions.
That was the thing that opened my eyes to the power of camp ministry to reach young people for the Lord. And I kept saying to myself, I just wish there was a camp we could go to that would do all this work for us.
I suppose, Walt, that people want to know right off the bat, why in the world did you ever pick the desert of California to start a camp in?
I've only got one question, though.
Okay, you got another question?
Yes, sir. Why exactly is camp in the desert?
Well, that's an interesting question. I do get asked that question a lot.
My folks had a ranch over here about 8 miles from where Ironwood is today. I would bring my young people up there to do an overnight thing, and they just really loved the desert. I started looking for a piece of property close to my parents' place we could buy that we could put a little building on and keep all of our equipment there, and we wouldn't have to haul it back and forth. Well, nothing was available. A couple months later, the realtor came and said, here's another piece of property, and it was this property here, 185 acres. And I said, it's too far from Dad's place, and it's way too big. It's not what I wanted. And, I just put it in my desk and left it there. One Sunday afternoon, I said, one of the men at church said something about wanting to be part of start of a camp if I ever wanted to start a camp. I said, I'll just take this and show it to him. I took it to church that Sunday evening. Lo and behold, he wasn't there. I went to the group of men that he normally would talk with after church and asked him if anybody had seen Ray. And they said, no, he's not here tonight. He said, oh, well, one of the men in the group, turned out it was Mr. Chastain. He says, well, what do you want him for? I said, well, I have this prospectus on a piece of property I was wanting to look at about camp, and I just wanted to talk to him about it. I said, well, let me see that. Land development's kind of my hobby. And so I showed him that, and he piped up and says, well, what if I buy it and you guys just rent it from me and use it? There were all-night prayer meetings, a lot of discussion. We try to meet every week to discuss the pros and cons. All right. Are we sure God wants us to start a camp? Yes, we're sure. Okay, is this the property? We don't know. Let's do some research. We had said no, and it was in August. I was taking my young people to camp. My dad got this phone call, and it was from the lady who owned this property. She called and said, wouldn't you guys like to buy this property? And I said, what would be the bottom line? And she says, oh, any little thing. So I says, okay, Miss Tyler, I'm on my way to camp. I'll be gone for a whole week. I called Mr. Chastain. He said, okay, he would get with her. They discussed it and came up with a final offer. And when I got back, I talked with Mr. Chastain, and he said, well, we have a camp.
We acquired these facilities back about 11 years ago, 185 acres. We just had one building here at the time. We didn't pick the desert, first of all. God picked it for us. He's the one that provided the miracle and led us here very directly.
We were able to negotiate it down to $71,000 for that 185 acres. We actually formed a partnership in the purchase of the property, and because our nonprofit was not yet established. There were 4 people. It was Mr. Chastain and myself and my dad and my brother. 3 Brocks and 1 Chastain, so we started a partnership called the Triple BC Ranch. And its primary purpose was to own the property. And then when it was all paid for, we were going to donate it to the nonprofit that we were working at getting established. The only fly in the ointment about that whole thing was that Chuck insisted I put in half the down payment. So we wiped out our savings account pretty good. And we put in half the down payment. And
how old were you guys? How old were you both?
I was 27.
I was 25. It wasn't something that I could say, oh, I was all excited about, because it was new for me. I'd never been to camp, although I did take a camp work class in college. I didn't know enough to be positive, and probably didn't know enough to be negative either. I was pregnant with Daniel at the time. Daniel was born in the spring of '73. During that maternity leave, Walt's brother John came over and taught me how to set up the bookkeeping books. That was kind of an interesting maternity leave. And then we moved that summer to a mobile home.
I have made a deal with the church that I got 1 day a week off, so every other week I would take 2 days, come up here and work. And Mr. Chastain had a couple of college kids he had hired for the summer with his business. He had let me bring them with. They and I built the add-on for the front room onto that mobile home, got it all set up, so we had a place to live.
Started looking around and trying to figure out where God would send us to build a camp. And he opened doors in this direction and closed doors in another direction. And there's not a doubt in my mind that this is the place God would have us to be.
What do you think was the biggest hurdle to overcome?
Where will the kids come from? And when we started the camp, there was no one church or any group of churches that said, if you start a camp, we'll send our kids. It was just this confidence that I had that it's what God wanted us to do. You announce that you're going to have a camp on such and such date, and date comes, and does anybody show up? Our first official retreat for Ironwood would have been in the spring of '74, First Baptist Church in Santa Maria. For the first 2 years we ran camp, they were all Nehemiah camps, where kids would come and work half day, and then the afternoon we had camp activities and 2 services a day and that kind of stuff. But we got a lot of work done during that time. It was in 1975 that we had our first summer camp. In '75, we built the giant shade at the lake, the giant slide. We built the Durango cabin. In '76, we built the kitchen add-on to this building. In the summer of '76, we built the old western fronts down here and got those modulars that Mr. Chastain gave us set up for 2 cabins and our camp offices. '77, the second half of the summer, we ran, for the first time ever, regular camps. I think in those days we charged $80 or something like that for a camp. 20 years after we started, Chuck and I had a discussion that I think this thing's going to work. I remember announcing somewhere around that time to our staff, for the very first time we had enough contracted to come here that I could foresee that we had 5 months of guaranteed income. So, every day a miracle. The whole thing that I learned is that God knows more than I do. He's called me to do the job. Okay, I'm going to just start doing it, and when he wants me to do something a little different, he'll let me know. I had to have faith that that's what God wanted me to do. The process for me has been the process of growing in faith, step by step, day by day. We lived here 7 years before we started getting paychecks from the camp. And during those 7 years, I could not tell you any one steady source of income except about the second year we were here, Betty's home church. The ladies' Sunday school class started sending us a monthly gift of $50 or something.
It was 25.
$25. We appreciate that church. My dad had turkey ranch, so we ate a lot of turkey. And
Do you like turkey?
oh yeah, I still love it. You know, Betty figured out about 30 different ways to fix it. Well, you learn to live by faith, and I don't ever remember us missing a meal. Matter of fact, we ended up with 2 chest freezers so that we could store the food that we had.
I think the thing that I am just constantly having to learn and relearn, and it's been such a exciting thing to learn, is that God can be trusted. He is trustworthy. I was doing a Bible study, and it's like, of course God is trustworthy. Of course he can be trusted. But until you live your life that way, make your daily decisions knowing he can be trusted. I think that's been my constant learning. I have a plaque up in my house that reminds me of that all the time, and it's very simple, is that it pleases God when I believe him.
Chuck and I, as co-founders, often talked about the value of doing in time what's going to last for eternity, the eternal values of things, and that what we're doing here has value not just in our lifetime but beyond our lifetime. It's important that we had that eternal value. What we're doing here may or may not fail earthly wise, but what we're doing is of eternal value. Precious souls are getting saved, kids are being won to the Lord, lives are turned around. Doing the eternal in time was a very important thing for both of us.
And the idea that made the difference in my life was that I'm going to live forever, and that what I do on an eternal basis is what's going to make the difference.
Chuck, just a couple weeks before he passed away, Sam and I went down and spent a few hours with him in the hospice place where he was, and we talked about the eternal. And he told Sam, the only thing I have left in life is that which I've given away.
We want to see the young people branded by the decisions that they make for Jesus Christ.
And then all the activities are focused on this area of preaching the Word of God and getting those people to think about things from a spiritual standpoint. What I do on this earth in terms of materialistic gain or whatever is of little value for all eternity. My goals are eternal goals. My God is eternal God.